I heard the scream before I ever saw the shadow. It tore through the valley at dusk, thin, human, and wrong, until every dog in the hamlet fell silent and the air tasted of old fear. By the time I reached the place they pointed to, the prints in the mud stopped as if someone had swallowed the path whole. A child was missing. A family was shattered. And the word passed between them like a fever, the beast. I came to Gévaudan because I wanted to see what the old stories looked like close-up, to strip away the parable and find the fact. The region is not what you picture from history books, no grand capital, no neat rows of printed laws, just ragged limestone, steep pine ridges, and valleys where fog lays low like a living thing. The people there still speak in hushed tones. They still cross themselves when the wind moves east. They told me about the years the beast walked, the mid-1700s, they said, when children disappeared, shepherds were mauled, and travelers altered their routes to avoid a name whispered at night. At first the accounts felt like braided folklore exaggeration wrapped around truth, but then the details converged. Witness after witness described the same impossible things, a creature like a wolf but wrong in proportion. Jaws too large for any natural predator, a roar that sounded more like a human scream than an animal's cry. The way it hunted in daylight as easily as at night. A farmer showed me a charred cloak he'd found snagged in bramble, its edges singed though there was no sign of fire nearby. An old woman traced the outline of a long wound in the dirt where a man had tried to fend the thing off. No gore, she said, only a raggedness that made men speak softer. The first time I felt true alarm was when I tracked the prints myself. They were enormous, two sets, staggered, like a wolf that had been stretched. The paw pads were too deep, the claws too long and arched, leaving grooves like scratched tree bark across the soft earth. Yet between those prints were strange disturbances, low, furrowed drag marks, as if something heavy had brushed the ground with its tail, and then more unnerving, the way the track sometimes walked on two legs and sometimes on four. I ran my fingers over the impression and felt heat still rising from the soil late into the evening, heat where nothing should have been warm. Locals offered explanations stitched from faith and fear. Some swore it was a wolf infected by some disease that had made it cunning and bold. Others muttered about witches and condemned souls. A shepherd told me of hearing the beast speak once, not words, he said, but a cadence that made his bones ache. It isn't a beast alone, he whispered. It's a force. It picks what it wants, and afterwards it leaves a mark on the valley. We are not the same as before. That night I slept poorly in a stone cottage under a roof that shook with every gust. I dreamed of eyes, too many of them reflecting like lanterns from the gullies, and woke certain that someone had watched me from the hedgerow. When I went out at dawn to check the fields, I found the shepherd's goat pen torn open but empty. The ropes had been sliced clean, nothing left where bodies should have been. No blood, no torn flesh, only silence so thick it felt curated. It was as if the valley had been cleaned after a sacrament. I started collecting testimony. A midwife who'd seen a shadow move across a field in midday sun and felt a chill set into the marrow of her bones. A cart driver who insisted the beast ran on two legs and then, without warning, bounded away on four, faster than any horse. Each story added a thread, and the web they formed was ugly and precise. The beast was not a single wolf. It had patterns, preferences, intelligence. It struck older women and young children without a consistent reason, and sometimes it simply watched a family for days before it chose a moment to take. The randomness made it worse. The valley learned to bend its life around that unpredictability. On my third day, I followed a path to an old chapel on the ridge where townsfolk left offerings. Someone had placed a child's toy on the steps, a wooden horse with one ear chewed off and a scrap of paper with a prayer. The chapel door was open when no one expected it to be. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and wet fur. I told myself that was superstition. Of course it was, but then I found the scratches on the wooden lintel, deep gouges made by something larger than a man could reach. The shape of the gouges matched the proportions I'd seen in the tracks. That evening, as fog rolled through the valley like cold water, I heard it again, a low exhalation that might have been a breath or a laugh. It came from the far ridge, where the moon turned the pines into rows of teeth. The dogs that had barked at my arrival fell still. I felt the hair along my arms tighten as if with static. Something in me that had been skeptical and neat and certain of rational cause recoiled with a primitive knowing. This was not merely a predator, it was an event. I returned to the inn, hands shaking enough to spill my tea. The innkeeper, an old man who'd seen winters enough to remember when silence was safe, simply nodded when I told him. "You will see it," he said, "or you will not. But the valley remembers those who talk too loud about such things." He would not elaborate. He had his reasons. The warning felt real. I lay awake until the stars faded and thought about how easy it is to call something a legend until you are the one standing in its shadow. I thought about the child whose footprints ended in a sudden break and about the way the tracks could shift from quadruped to biped as though the earth itself wore different shoes. I kept returning to the same small, terrible question. What do you do when the story you sought finds you first? When the first light of dawn drew the forest edges in thin gold, I made a choice. I would not be chased away by whispers. I would follow the marks deeper into the ravine where the farmers would not go after sunset. If the beast wanted to be seen, then I would be the witness who would later tell its tale. I should have known then. The valley offers a choice, but it rarely yields mercy. The ravine was colder than it should have been. Even with sunlight breaking through the canopy, the air there clung to the lungs as though it had been buried underground for centuries. My boots slid on damp stone as I followed the line of prints down into the hollow. They were clearer here, sharper, as if whatever left them wanted me to see. I counted 9 steps, enormous and deliberate, then nothing. The ground was untouched, as if the creature had dissolved mid-stride. But when I crouched lower, I saw the soil was pressed inward, compacted, as though something heavy had stood hovering there without a body to hold its weight. My hand trembled when I brushed against it. The dirt was warm again, faintly pulsing like breath. A crow startled from the branches above me, its wings thrashing the silence. In that instant, I thought I saw movement in the tree line. Not a shape, exactly, but the impression of something bulky, too quick, its outline smearing against the fog. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, but my curiosity rooted me in place. I told myself this was why I had come, though the part of me that still prayed knew better. By midday I reached the ruins of an abandoned farmstead. Its timbers leaned like weary bones, the thatch long since rotted away. On the stone wall near the entrance I found gouges again, jagged, furious scratches crossing one another until they almost resembled symbols. Some looked like crude letters, though in no language I recognized. The villagers had told me the beast was no ordinary predator, but this was the first time I felt that it might be trying to communicate. Or worse, mocking us with the echo of language. Inside, the smell hit me, copper, wet fur, and something acrid that burned the throat. The floor was scattered with bones, small ones, cracked clean. A goat's skull, a child's shoe lying half buried in ash. My chest tightened. I had thought myself prepared for gore, but what unsettled me most was the order of it. Each bone was aligned, as if arranged in deliberate rows. Predators do not tidy their slaughter. Something else had done this. I left the farmhouse quickly, but as I stepped back into the clearing, I froze. The air had gone utterly still, not a bird, not a leaf stirred. And then softly, unmistakably, a low sound broke the quiet. It was laughter. Not fully human, not fully animal, but something jagged between the two, carried across the hollow as though it had been waiting for me to leave. I ran until the trees blurred into streaks of black and green. I do not remember how I found the path back to the village, only that my lungs screamed and my heart felt like it might tear itself loose. When I finally stumbled into the open square, people looked at me without surprise. They had seen this look before. That night, the innkeeper's wife came to me. She pressed a wooden rosary into my hand and said only, "It marks those who see it." I asked what she meant, but she shook her head, eyes downcast, and left me in the glow of the single candle. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time my eyes closed, I heard that laughter again, echoing across the stones. By the third day, I began to notice something worse than fear: recognition. My reflection in the basin looked thinner, my eyes a little too sharp. When I walked past the livestock pens, the animals shifted uneasily. The butcher refused to meet my gaze. I wondered then, did the beast choose its prey at random, or did it leave part of itself in those who survived its presence? At dawn I resolved to seek the chapel again, to ask the priest what prayers had been spoken in those walls when the beast roamed centuries ago. If there was any knowledge of how it had been driven away, or if it had ever truly left, this was where it would be. I thought perhaps I was hunting a creature. By then, I realized I was chasing something far less simple. The valley did not just remember the beast, the valley obeyed it, and now so did I. The chapel stood at the edge of the village, its stone walls worn thin by centuries of rain and fear. The bell tower leaned slightly, as though trying to listen to the earth below it. When I pushed open the heavy oak door, the hinges moaned, echoing into the stale silence. Inside, the air smelled of wax and dust, thick with prayers that had long since lost their strength. The priest was waiting, or perhaps he had always been there. His figure seemed carved from the shadows themselves, tall, thin, eyes sunken as though he had not slept in years. When I asked him about the beast, his lips trembled, but not with fear. It was recognition. He gestured for me to follow him deeper into the chapel, where the walls grew darker, colder, as though the very stones carried secrets. We descended into a crypt beneath the altar. Candles burned there, though no one had lit them. Their flames swayed without wind. On the walls, murals told a story older than I expected, a great black form leaping from the forest, its jaws open wide. Villagers kneeling, not in resistance, but in worship. This was no simple predator. The beast had been a covenant. The priest whispered, "It is not one creature, it is many, a hunger-given form. It was bound here once, but the land remembers. The land calls it back when faith weakens." His voice cracked at the last word, as though he had carried it like a curse. I wanted to dismiss him, to call this superstition. But then he handed me a book, its leather cover cracked, its pages brittle. Inside were accounts, each one in a different hand, spanning decades. The same descriptions repeated: yellow eyes like lanterns, a body larger than any Volf, a voice that was not growl but mockery. Always the same, always returning. The final entry chilled me most. It was dated only 3 winters ago. The words swam in my vision as I read. It does not kill for food. It kills for reflection. Each life taken is a mirror, each scream another echo. When the echoes are enough, it becomes. That night, I left the village again, against every warning. I could not shake the sense that if I stayed, I would not be a guest but a sacrifice. The forest was alive with whispers, though no mouth spoke them. My lantern barely pushed back the dark, and often I thought I saw shapes dart just beyond its reach, shapes too tall, too twisted for wolves. Near the river, I found more signs, a carcass half buried in mud, untouched by scavengers. The body was rigid, eyes wide, but there was no blood, as though something had drained it without breaking the skin. I stepped closer, and the earth shifted beneath my boots. For a moment, I swore I felt something moving below the ground, crawling, dragging itself in silence. The sound returned then, that laugh, jagged and cruel, weaving through the trees, but this time it was closer, circling. My chest tightened, my legs begged me to flee, but I forced myself still. I needed to see it, I needed to know. And then, through the fog, it appeared. Not fully wolf, not fully man, its body shimmered, twisting, as if it couldn't decide what form to wear. Eyes burning, teeth glinting with unnatural light. My breath froze. It did not attack, it only watched. And in that silence I realized the truth. I was not hunting it. I was being led. The beast turned slowly, deliberately, and began to walk deeper into the woods. Each step echoed like iron striking stone, though its paws left no mark. Against all reason, I followed. Hours passed or minutes, time fractured in its presence. The trees grew taller, their branches like arms reaching inward. The night pressed heavier with each step, until even the stars seemed swallowed. Finally, we reached a clearing, and there, at the center, was something I could never have imagined. A pit, enormous, gaping, lined with bones that spiraled downward into endless dark. The beast stood at its edge, waiting, as if presenting its throne. The ground trembled faintly, as though the earth itself pulsed with a heartbeat beneath us. And then it turned its head toward me slowly, deliberately, and smiled. I realized too late what the villagers had meant. Once you see it, you are marked. The pit was not its home, it was its reflection. And standing there, I could feel it, something inside me answering that call. The beast had not chosen me by accident, it had been preparing me. The clearing seemed to breathe with me, as though the forest itself waited for my choice. The beast stood silent, its body shifting in and out of form, part shadow, part flesh. Its smile lingered, wider than should be possible, and in its gaze I felt not hatred but recognition. I stepped closer to the pit. The stench of old bones rose like smoke, and the ground shuddered with a rhythm not my own. It was then that I understood what the priest had meant. The beast was not bound to one body, one age, or even one legend. It was a hunger that borrowed shapes, wearing them like masks. And once you had looked into its eyes, you carried part of it forever. "Why me?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The echo that followed was not mine. The laugh rang through the clearing, a fractured, echoing chorus, as though every victim's voice still lived within it. The beast leaned forward, its face inches from mine, breath colder than the night air. It did not speak, but in that silence I heard a truth more dreadful than words. I had not come here to learn about it. I had come here to remember it, to keep the story alive. The ground cracked beneath my boots, splintering outward from the pit. Bones shifted, tumbling, and from the abyss rose a sound like thousands of wings tearing through the earth. I staggered back, my lantern falling and shattering. Darkness swallowed the clearing. Only its eyes remained to burning stars in the void. Then, without a word, it vanished. The pit closed as though it had never been, the forest silent once more. I returned to the village at dawn, though it no longer felt the same. The priest was gone, the chapel empty, no trace of him, no trace of the murals, no trace of the book. As though the night had rewritten the world itself. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me back. In every shadow, I hear its breath. In every reflection, I glimpse its teeth. The beast does not need to kill me. It only needs me to speak, to tell you, to make you wonder, to make you afraid, because that is how it grows stronger. And now, you've heard the story, you've let it in. If you dare to keep walking deeper into the dark with me, drop a like, leave a comment about what you believe, and subscribe to my channel for more legends like this one. Just don't be surprised if, tonight, you hear laughter outside your window.